Bring us the word.
Well, the word that we want me to read today is Matthew chapter 12. It starts out in the first part of Matthew chapter 12. Has about they're hungry. It's a Sabbath, which is Saturday for the Jews, and they're hungry, so they go across this wheat field and they get some grain, and they're basically rubbing it between their hands to eat. And the Pharisees call them on it and say, you can't do that. It's the Sabbath. It's Sunday. Now, I grew up Sunday church. We never watched TV on Sunday. That was a given until later on when my mother got more liberal and we watched MASH after Sunday night. But Sunday morning, and then the paper would come, Sunday morning paper would have to go underneath the bed, and you couldn't read it till Monday morning. That was just, all I'm saying by all this, it's funny how we as people continually take God's word and try to understand what it means in daily life. And I remember that people of Israel got their fannies kicked by the Babylonians, basically because they couldn't get their act together and obey God's law. So when they came back after 70 years and they had to rebuild the temple, I mean, you can't blame them. They kind of said, hey, we don't want to get killed again. Let's figure this out. And so they took a simple phrase like, keep the Sabbath holy. That's it. And they said, what does that mean? And then they came up with 1,000 different things that it meant. Like how many steps you can literally take on the Sabbath. And then I was reading one passage where you had to go out, if you had to go to the garbage dump or to the restroom outside the city, you literally had to make sure you were going to count your steps correctly because you didn't want to go too many. We become legalistic, do we not? And so that's understanding. So you got to understand that that's where Jesus is saying in the very beginning. And the phrase that he uses, the story that he uses, is the story of David. He goes, well, hey, look it. David did things that were unlawful. So when David was running from Saul, you know King David? King David was basically the second king. Saul was the first. David was the second. He wrote most of the Psalms. He's running from Saul for his life. He goes to the place where the high priest is, and the high priest gives him the bread on the table because his people are hungry. You're not supposed to do that. That's only for the priest. So he breaks the rules so that David and his men can eat. And then when the problem is, Saul comes later and kills all those people for doing that. That's a whole other story. But Jesus reminds them, the Lord is the Lord of the Sabbath. It's not about rules. It's not about regulations. I believe are you preaching on this? All right, I think that's awesome. So Matthew chapter 12, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful. Now, not unscriptural, unlawful, because people like to make up laws. Jesus answered, haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? Now remember why he's hungry is because he's running for his life. He entered the house of God, didn't have a temple back then, basically a big tent in the middle of the field. He entered the house of God, he and his companions ate the consecrated bread. Now it sounds like he just went in and ate it. He was given by the high priest, gave it to them, so he didn't do it pushfully, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath, yet are innocent? How do they desecrate the Sabbath? Because they're working. Pastor, when I was a pastor, people used to say, what's this like to only have to work one day a week? I'd say, you're just jealous. And that's what they're saying here. The priests are working on the Sabbath, yet they're not in trouble, right? If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned these people here eating grain. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. May God add his blessing to the reading of the word today.
Amen. Thank you, brother. So, I'm thirsty. That has nothing to do with the message. Usually it would, but it doesn't. I'm just thirsty. But I'm thinking about what Pastor Scott was just getting at. Look at that. I remembered his name. Pastor Scott was kind of going, oh, you're preaching on this. Maybe I should be quiet. I wasn't going to encourage him to be quiet at all, because God speaks to all of us in different ways. And you guys know that sometimes, okay, I'll take it this way. From my kids' standpoint, sometimes I'll say something to my daughter, and she doesn't hear it. Like, it doesn't sink in. But then when somebody else says something to her, exact same thing that I said, she's like, oh, you know what I learned? Sometimes we hear from somebody else a little differently. And sometimes God uses us to say things differently. So today we are talking about the Sabbath. We're going to talk a lot about the things that Pastor Scott just talked about. But I'm glad he did that, because he has something that I didn't have. He just knows something that I don't know. He has experiences that I don't have. He's been in the church for a long time and seen these traditions that we have that are like kind of like what the Pharisees are dealing with here, with a tradition of following the law in a certain way. I came up younger, in a later time in the church, to where some of the traditions that we used to have were no longer there. I've seen traditions in my time that some of you have never experienced. And we're going to talk a lot about tradition today. And I'm kind of excited about it because, I just love God's Word because it has so many different things you can go after on it. But last time we talked about the Sabbath, I talked about rest. You guys remember that? It was like I even sat on the stage that day and preached sitting in my seat, expressing the need that we have to rest. And the Sabbath rest is highly important. So no matter what I say today, don't ever think that I'm saying that Sabbath rest is not important. It is. But it's the heart behind in which we do it that's really important. So I'm not talking about rest today. However, we're talking about the Sabbath. Today we're going to look at the importance of understanding the heart behind God's command to keep the seventh day holy. So what's your heart behind really anything that you do? Whether it's the Sabbath or anything else. What's your heart? And as I get into that, I'll tell you kind of my little story. A long time ago, many years ago, when I was just in my 20s, there was a kind of a tradition in the church that you do not walk into the sanctuary with your hat on. So here's what I'm going to say. If you have a hat on right now, don't let me make you feel uncomfortable. I don't care if you're wearing a hat, okay? That's fine. But 20 years ago, that was a tradition. And I bet you there's people in this church right now that might have a bit of an offense to that, somebody wearing a hat. And I remember that being kind of one of the rules and regulations and traditions of the church. You don't wear your hat, just one of the traditions. And I remember a specific time, we had brought in this new brother into the church. He began this discipleship group. He was a Native American guy, and he was very kind of defensive and a little skittish of the church and about rules and about people and the expectations and things that they put on you. And he came into church, and I remember he was sitting right over here, and he was wearing a hat. And I didn't care that he was wearing a hat, but I knew other people would. And there was a beautiful, lovely saint of the church who has gone to be with the Lord since. And she loves Jesus, let me tell you. There is no doubt that she loved Jesus. But man, did it bother her that somebody was wearing a hat. And I was the men's ministry director. So whatever reason, she felt I was the guy to talk to because that's a man, right? So she says, Mike, can you talk to that young man? Something like that. Can you talk to that young man and ask him to take his hat off in the sanctuary? And I'll tell you, this happened. This was the second time this had happened. The first time this happened was a few years before that. And I was like, oh, wow, this saintly lady of the church, and I'm pretty new here, told me to go tell him. I'm going to go tell him. And I went and told somebody, hey, can you take your hat off? I don't know if that affected that guy much. But with this man, when she told me, instantly I knew, no, I am not going to tell him to take his hat off. I know this man. I know his heart. I know where he's from. I know how fragile he is. So I said, I'm sorry, but I will communicate with him the importance of what you're talking about eventually, but not today. And I walked away, and I did not tell him. But as what I did do was I addressed it in a discipleship group. Not about him, because I knew if I had said that to him, he would have felt rejected. He would have been embarrassed, and he would have been feeling unloved, and he probably would have never came back. I know that because of this. I came to this church the first time. This was before that. That was before Pastor Scott was here. And that was when I was I was young. I was 22 or something. And I came into this church, and I played basketball twice with this group of men. I got invited, and I wore a shirt that had a guy opening a can on, and it said, "Don't make me open this." And the can had, kind of said what it was. And I got approached the second time I was here and said, first of all, you can't wear that shirt here. Second of all, this is your second time here and you still haven't come to church, so unless you come to church, you can't come back. Guess what I didn't do? I did not come back. And then a friend of mine called me and said, hey, you're still kind of church hopping. That pastor's gone. We got a new guy that's really good. You should come hear him speak. So I did, and I've been here ever since. My point about that whole thing is that, you guys, sometimes our traditions aren't worth it. That guy, I was able to work with him in discipleship. Eventually, you know what I said to him? I said that some people have this, put things kind of up here, and sometimes we do things, we humble ourselves, and we do things so that we don't hurt them, even though it has nothing to do with your relationship with the Lord. So I said, in order to help that person not stumble, will you take your hat off? And I used it as an opportunity for him to be humble. And I taught that kind of an idea into his life. And he came gladly without his hat on, going, I can take my hat off. It's not because it's creating a division between me and God, but it's because I get to be humble and allow somebody else to enjoy worship without being discouraged because I'm wearing a hat. Does that make sense? Like, I just totally approached it differently. Eventually, that person wasn't wearing the hat anymore and all that. Guess what? I don't care if you're wearing a hat. You got to hear that. I don't care. I understand some people do. I understand it's a respect thing. I understand it's a culture thing. I understand it's like, I still take my hat off when I'm saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I still take my hat off when I come into the sanctuary, even though I don't think I have to. I still take my hat off every time that I pray. It's a respect thing. It's an honor thing for me. But it doesn't affect me if you're wearing yours. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm kind of using that as an example of where we're going today. I'm sure most of you can relate to what I just talked about. In some way, some fashion, you might be the person that's going, I hate wearing hats. I can't believe he just said not to. And that's okay. That's okay. And you might be somebody that's like, I've never even heard of such a thing. And that's okay too. We love both of you. We do. We love both of you. Possibly you remember a tradition that was important to you in your life that's been lost. Do you remember a tradition of the church that was important to you that's been lost? I can remember some that I really liked that we don't do anymore. Possibly you're new in our church and have no idea what the traditions are. That's a blessing to me. Not because I don't want to do the tradition. Some of the traditions I really like. In fact, I've brought some back as the pastor. I like it because we get to teach what the traditions are for, as far as honoring God, and not just to do a tradition, because that's what you're supposed to do. So any traditions we do here at Monaz, I hope that, I know why I do it. It's because I want to honor God. I want to represent God in His holiness and His grace and His love. I hope that's your heart too, no matter what the tradition is. Let me say this to all of you. Tradition should always be second place to loving God and to loving people. It should always be second place to loving God and loving people. Whatever the tradition is, let it be second place. Don't let it take rule over loving God and loving people. Do you kind of see this in today's scripture verse that we read in Matthew chapter 12? I see it like I could almost probably quit talking, but I'm not going to. Pastor Scott just said that I went to Texas last week, and I did, and it was fantastic. I am tired. I haven't slept a lot, but I am full. I'll tell you what, we had the best worship that, I've experienced in so long. It was, oh man, it was good. 3 days of 8-hour-a-day worship and listening to people preach and bring the word, and I wasn't in charge. I got to just receive and worship God. You know, as I come back, I'm thinking about, what did I receive? What word did God give me? And here's what I'm going to tell you. We need to be people about prayer, and we need to be people about listening. Like, I want Michelle, Pastor Michelle's in the same boat as me. The last 3 things I've gone to, whether it's at the district or whether it's at this event we just went to, when I come back, I'm just feeling like somehow we have to help our people, God's people, the people that are in this body of believers, to understand the importance of prayer. It needs to become our culture. It needs to become who we are, not just as a congregation, but as individuals. We need to be people that understand the importance of talking and listening to God on a daily, hour by hour, moment by moment, praying without ceasing. That needs to be who we are if we want God to move and we want God to reach the lost people of this world. You guys, if you don't have a personal culture of prayer, I want to encourage you to pray. I'm dreaming up ideas of how we can do that. Pastor Michelle is dreaming up ideas of how we can teach that and model that. You guys, we need to be people of prayer. That's not a tradition that we just go, oh, that's just a tradition. That's not one of those. That is about loving God and loving people. Because we love God and speak to God. And what do we speak to Him about? Oh, Lord, help me be rich. No. God, bring the lost people to the cross. It's about loving God and loving people. That's off topic. Sorry. I went down a rabbit trail, but not sorry. But this brings us to today's passage. And today we're going to read out of Matthew chapter 12, but if you also want to see kind of the reflecting verses out of Mark, it's chapter 2, 23 through 28, and Luke chapter 6, 1 through 5. And in those you'll find kind of the same story, but some of it's worded just a little bit different. But all 3 of these Gospels, these new good news accounts of Jesus, have the story of the disciples gleaning grain when they're hungry. And Pastor Scott pointed out that they're hungry. Like, that's why they're doing it. They're hungry, right? So that's why they're doing this. And we're focused on Matthew today, so I want to help you understand what's happening in Matthew, because we've been doing this chronological story, and some of it is in alignment with Matthew, some of it isn't. But over the last as you look at Matthew, if you back up, Matthew chapter 3, we see that John the Baptist called these Pharisees and these rulers that are talking to Jesus today, he calls them a brood of vipers. And him and Jesus are like two peas in a pod. Like John the Baptist is a forerunner, and they relate Jesus and John the Baptist together. And here's Jesus having this conversation with the Pharisees, the same Pharisees that John the Baptist calls a brood of vipers. And then you've got Matthew 5. Jesus said, unless your righteousness, he says to the people, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter my kingdom. So he's like calling them out, like saying, unless you do even better than these guys who think that they're holy, who think they're righteous, unless you do better than them, you're never going to enter the kingdom of God. And he's saying, even they aren't going to enter. Does that kind of remind you of a scripture where it says that you will be surprised who is and who isn't in the kingdom of God? Sometimes when we're righteous, or we think we're righteous, we're actually steering people away from God. And then in Matthew chapter 5 through 7, all through there, Jesus continues to destroy the confidence of the religion of the Pharisees. Like he's continuing to just speak against the religion and the religiosity of the Pharisees. And he's talking about the kingdom of God and loving people and loving God, and he's speaking against them. And they're getting more and more angry. And in Matthew 9, they accuse Jesus of blasphemy and say that he's demon-possessed. So this has been happening as he goes. And then in chapter 12, it's a kind of a milestone of the rejection of Jesus. It's like the beginning of the end. It's the beginning of his trip to the cross. Because if you go and you find in verse 14 of Matthew chapter 12, you'll see that the Pharisees at this time began to plot how they might kill Jesus. So right after this, we're reading 1 through 8, I think. And in the same chapter, in verse 12, it says that they began to plot how they might kill Jesus. So this is like a transition in Jesus' life in Matthew. Why? Why is it a transition? It's because Jesus attacks the center of the Jewish ceremonial tradition called the Sabbath. He goes against it. He says that you, like, what are you so worried about this little thing? Like, why don't you worry more about loving people? Why don't you worry more about caring for the poor? Why don't you worry more about the things of God's heart? Why do you try to just take every little thing and just make it into this big thing that actually keeps people out of the kingdom of God? How about we focus our attention on Jesus instead, on our love for God? So what is the Sabbath? In Genesis 2:3, we find in the beginning that God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that which he had done. God has been from the beginning and will be to the end. And if God, the God of the power of authority, with all power and authority from the beginning to the end, rested on the Sabbath and called us in Exodus chapter 20 to rest on the Sabbath, and then I think we should rest on the Sabbath. But as Pastor Scott pointed out, it was mega holy, rest on the Sabbath, not all these other rules and regulations. So in Exodus 20, verse 8, let me just read it to you. It says, it's the fourth commandment. It says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Exactly what Pastor Scott said. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. And I always like to remind lazy people about that. 6 days you shall labor and do your work. Okay, enough of that. That's a different message. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servants, nor your animals, nor any other foreigner residing in your town. So, God makes it clear. Rest on the Sabbath. Work for 6 days, rest on the seventh day, have a restful day. Don't do work that day. Now, with that, another name that I remember this week, Brittany Klausner, gave me an article of 39 categories of Sabbath prohibited work from the Jewish law. So this is not God's law, but the Jewish people tried to define what it means. So Do you guys ever do that? Like, there's a law of God, and then you start creating your own rules to try to follow it, and then pretty soon it becomes like you didn't even really break God's law, but you broke your own rule, which might lead to breaking God's law. Maybe not. But here's this. 39 categories. I'm going to read them fast. And I want you to just recognize that this is not God's law. This is people's law. Caring, burning. So, listen. These are the things you can't do on your seventh day. So this would be Saturday. This is the stuff you cannot do. Okay, you ready? Caring, burning, extinguishing, finishing, writing, erasing, cooking, washing, sewing, tearing, knotting, untying, shaping, plowing, planting, reaping, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, selecting, sifting, grinding, kneading, combining, spinning, dyeing. Don't be dyeing your hair. Chain stitching. So no knitting, no crocheting, ladies. Warping, weaving, unraveling, building, demolishing, trapping, shearing, slaughtering, skinning, tanning, smoothing. Don't smooth out your covers. And of course, no marking. Like, don't write. Hey, is anybody taking notes today? Right? No marking. That's quite a list. And inside of each of those it's just a category. There's a list underneath each of them defining what you can't do, right? He came to make our burden light, right? I get stressed out just thinking about it. I mean, holy mackerel. I think I wrote in my notes later that, like, Jesus, in this, it says no grinding, and I was like, does that mean I can't chew? Because when I'm chewing, there's some grinding going on. I can't cook. Apparently I can't eat either. Like, you could take it on and on and on, and that's what the Pharisees are doing here. So of the 10 Commandments, just so you know, the fourth is the only ritualistic law. It's the only one. The first 3 are about loving God and respecting God and honoring God, and the last 5 are about loving and respecting and honoring human beings, people, your brothers and sisters. Because remember, Jesus says that you can sum up the whole law by loving God and loving people. That's what he means. And this is the only ritualistic one. So Jesus is not rejoicing or rejecting the ritualistic law. So he's not rejecting it. I want you to hear that. We can still keep the Sabbath day holy. Jesus isn't rejecting it. He's rejecting the heart behind what they were doing. He's rejecting the idea of adding laws upon laws upon laws upon God's law. That's what he's rejecting. Keeping the seventh day holy, but he wanted them to understand that the moral law was more important than their focus on rituals. So if you go to Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, it says, Jesus really kind of lays it out here. He says, woe to you, teachers of the law. Who's he speaking to right now? Teachers of the law, the Pharisees. And Pharisees, you hypocrites. Do you think I don't think they were a fan of Jesus. You hypocrites, you give 1/10 of your spice, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Let me ask this question as we think about, as we serve God, as we come to church, as we tithe, as we sing worship, as we take communion, as we baptize, as we whatever we do in our way of worshiping. Is it about justice, mercy, and faithfulness? Or is there something else? Because he says, the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. So practice your seventh day. Practice that without neglecting the love of people, without neglecting the love of God, without neglecting justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And Jesus comes and says moral issues is more important than keeping religious ceremonies. How many people are so, they're strict I'm going to read the scriptures every single day. That's a good thing. Don't not do that. I want you to do that. But don't just read the scriptures every single day and then get in your car and go, "Brr, hey, sucker," like all of a sudden you're like become this other person. Like, if you're going to read the scriptures every day, allow it to seep in and change who you are, so that when you drive down the road and you see somebody and they irritate you and they flip you off, you say, "Well, praise you too. Bless you. God bless you. I hope you have a good day. I hope you find Jesus." Like, it doesn't affect me. Because when I go and I do those things, it's not about doing those things. It's about growing in my relationship with God and allowing Him to transform me. Are you allowing God to transform you? Mark 2:27 says, "Then He said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." And this is in the same story that we're hearing in Matthew, but it's in Mark's. And He just adds this thing. He says to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So specifically with the Sabbath, He's saying, quit trying to mess it all up and make it harder on men to be obedient to God. Instead, allow men to be obedient to God by having a restful, relaxing day. Serving God and worshiping Him and doing what they enjoy. Like, stop trying to add things to what I say. Do you ever add things to what God says? Like, just kind of add something in? I know, like, I'm trying to think of an example. This is off the cuff, but like, I think of when people say, I can think of a few things right now, but it would hurt people's feelings. I just think the Lord's telling me that I just feel it. He's telling me that you should raise your hands when you worship. I think you should be more like Andrew and dance around and jump. If you're not doing that, I don't really think you're really loving God and worshiping Him. Right? I mean, I've heard that. Maybe I've thought that. I want you guys to get real. Don't think about the Sabbath maybe. Maybe there's some other thing in your life that you put more importance on than actually worshiping God. In the New Testament, the ritual law of the Sabbath is not commanded. The moral law of loving God and loving people are commanded in the New Testament. The New Testament doesn't ever have this great commandment that you have to rest on this day and you have to do all these things. It doesn't say that. It says to love God and love people. And if you're going to love God, He says to rest on the seventh day. So let me encourage you to rest on the seventh day. But that law is the one law that doesn't really have to do with loving people and loving God. It has to do with respecting God. It does. But it's not a moral law. It's not about sex and stealing and lying and all these things. It's about just simply, I want you to rest because it's good for you. That's what Jesus means when He says it was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, or vice versa. So let us jump into the scripture. So this is my warm-up to what we're going to talk about today. The scripture verses might go quickly because we're running out of time. But in Matthew chapter 12, 1 and 2, let me read it. It says, At that time, so right after He went and He healed the woman and healed the little girl and raised her from the dead, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to Him, Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. I love this story, and it might be all the further we get. But I love this story because there's a scene here where we see Jesus. And in fact, even this morning I was reading through it, and I began to reflect and think about how it reminds me of the story in Genesis when God was walking in the garden with Adam and Eve. And here's Jesus walking with His disciples through a grain field. He's got dirt on his feet from a plowed field. He might have stubbed his toe on a rock. He's been dealing with the dust of the day and all the things of the day, just like the disciples. And Jesus is walking with the disciples, loving them, walking along with them through life. And I don't even know if, this was just this morning. And I'm thinking about, wow. There's some people that think that God created everything and then was like, good luck, and left us all alone. God is walking with you. And in this story, we see that Jesus is physically walking with them through the grain field to go to the next place. I want you to hear that. When you're walking through the dirt and the mud and the hard work and you're stubbing your toe on the rocks and even in times like this where Jesus and the disciples just had a major up, they're excited. I can just see him. Andrew, did you see Jesus? He healed that girl. He raised her from the dead. God, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And when he healed that lady, he knew she touched him. And he's just, this is so good. And then, oh man, and I'm hungry. It's been a long day, man. I'm hungry. Pull some of those little pieces of kernel off. Have you ever eaten wheat off the kernel? It's gross. And they're like, oh man, and they're kind of rubbing it around in their fingers and the shaft flying away and they pop it in their mouth. And then suddenly, from behind a sheath of grain, out jumps the Pharisees. Why are your disciples breaking the law or the commandments, or what did he say? Breaking the law of the Sabbath. I can't believe you're wearing those glasses on your head. No, I'm serious. I want you to understand what's going on. They're doing real life. And the Pharisees are just looking for the opportunity to break them down, to cast judgment on them, to remove the joy they have of just being with Jesus. Do you ever sometimes feel like maybe people just come against you and try to just steal the joy of the Lord out of you for no reason other than to cast judgment or to cast their opinion on you? I just spent 3 days worshiping heartfelt worship with a bunch of people that are not like me. Very charismatic. I saw a lot of crying and weeping and snot. I saw people moaning and doing things. Not everybody, but there was all kinds of different people there. And at times, when I'm praying and worshiping God, and the person next to me is going, "Whoa!" I'm like, hey, be quiet. That judgment begins to sneak in. But who am I to say that what they're doing isn't something between them and the Lord? I'm going to let them worship God the way they're going to worship God. That's fine. I don't want to do it that way. I feel weird doing that. I don't get it. But that's why I'm a Nazarene pastor. I'm not going to cast judgment on them when they're worshiping the Lord. I'm not going to take their time with the Lord when they're walking and getting their feet dirty with Jesus. I'm not going to go and be like, why are you doing that? Just like when somebody comes to the altar and they're crying and I've had an altar call and they've come and they're confessing their sin to the Lord, and I've heard of people being like, why do people do that? Why do they go up there and make a big show of it? You know what? If that's you, whatever, that's fine. That's you. Let them be them. Let them get their feet dirty with the Lord. Let them get real with God and allow that dust from the day to be washed away as Jesus is washing their feet. In fact, instead of judging them, maybe you can come up and wash their feet with your hair. maybe you can come up and put a hand on them and walk through life with them. You guys, this is real stuff. I mean, there's so much that could be preached here, and I have a lot left there that we're not going to touch today. So you want to tune into the recap this week. I want you to hear today that God is more interested in your heart to love people and to love God than he is in tradition. So if tradition is keeping people out of the kingdom, stop that. Stop that. Stop doing it. Get away from it. I love tradition. I love certain traditions. Certain traditions really draw me in. I know at one time in this church, these stained glass windows were a big deal. I love those stained glass windows. But if those stained glass windows were to get covered up or were to break or whatever, it would not affect my relationship with the Lord at all. And I get it. They're special to people. I get that. And don't worry, I'm not getting rid of them. I like them. I'm not getting rid of them. I like them. But that's a kind of a thing to where you can put some tradition or something above actually loving God and loving people. I remember when we got rid of the, did we have an organ or just a piano? Just a piano. It was a big deal. And if that was you, that's fine. But man, don't let traditions overpower your love for God and love for people. Music. You know what? I'm going to tell you guys a secret. I love hymns. I love them. When we sing hymns, man, I love it. I worship. I don't have to look at the words because I remember them from years past. I love them. But I'm not going to let my love for hymns be more important than reaching a different generation. At the same time, younger generation, if you like other music and don't like hymns, get over it. Because sometimes we're going to sing hymns and we're going to worship God just the exact same way. Right? Our traditions aren't important. What's important is worshiping God with a whole heart. A whole heart. With everything you have. Lifting up praises to the King. Praying, listening, encouraging other people. Loving people to Jesus, helping them understand what this relationship with Jesus looks like. When you walk through the fields with Christ and you're picking the grains of wheat and you're eating them because you're so hungry, because you've been working so hard with Jesus and working so hard in the ministry, but you just love it. You're so excited because you're with Jesus. And people of the world don't understand it. Why wear yourself out for a God that you can't see? Why wear yourself out for other people that don't care about you? Why give your resources to a church that's just a big business? That's what the world sees. But you guys, we know different because we have walked in the grain field with Christ and experienced his love firsthand. Today, I'm going to invite you, if there's something in your heart right now, even the things I've talked about, things that I haven't talked about, things God's talking to you about, if there is something going on in your heart right now, and God is speaking to you, do not resist him. I'm going to invite you to come to an altar if you want. I'm going to invite people to come pray for you. I'm going to invite you, if God's speaking to you right now, and you don't want to come to an altar, you know what? Sometimes I don't want to come to the altar. Sometimes I just want to deal with something between me and God. And I don't want somebody to come pray for me. Then I just kneel at my chair. Right there, wherever I'm sitting. And I just talk to God and let him deal with me. Sometimes I'll do that for a while, and then he'll prompt me to go up front because I need somebody to come help me and walk with me through the dust. Whatever it is, if God is speaking to you today, and you have put something else as more important than loving God and loving people, move your body according to God's call. If he's telling you to do something, if he's prompting you, move your body. I don't care if you just move to the next seat next to you. Put action to what God is calling you to do. Begin with that small step and watch what God does. We're going to sing a song next, and I don't remember now. Our song that we're going to sing next is Gratitude. So in this next song, he picked it out for us and had no idea what this message is about because I didn't even tell him until like this week. But it invites you to understand that all songs end, but God's love never ends. It invites you to recognize, let me say it this way, that all traditions end, but the love of God never ends. So throw up your hands and give God everything and praise Him again and again and again. Today I invite you, as we recognize that Jesus is our true rest, to rest in Jesus. Don't let the moment pass you by. Don't just sit there when God's prompting you to move. The movement I asked for is very easy. You can move to the next seat. You can get on your knees where you're at. You can come to the altar. But allow God to work on your heart and remove any roadblock that's keeping you from getting into His true rest. Amen?